Here's what I want you to see. This prophet saw the trials. He saw the tragedy. He saw the turmoil. He saw the tension. But even in this, he was thankful and grateful because he understood that God had already won. He understood that God was in control. He understood that the battle that was coming their way was ultimately going to turn into a victory and something that produced glory for God. One commentator put it brilliantly. He put it this way. He said he realized that inner peace did not depend on outward prosperity. The inner peace of this prophet did not depend on the outward prosperity or the outward circumstances of his life. Imagine for a moment how different your entire world would be if you believed that. Imagine how different your worldview would be if you believed that. Imagine if you got to that place, how much would change? If your peace did not depend upon how much money was in your bank account, if your peace did not depend upon your reputation or what people thought of you or how good your name was, if your peace wasn't tied to your status or to your education or your power or your validity in your community or at your job, if your peace wasn't tied to how many friends you had or how many social events you got invited to, if your peace wasn't tied to your health and how good you felt, if your peace wasn't tied to your security or your understanding and ability to comprehend and make sense of the world that surrounds you. Imagine if your peace didn't depend on any of that. Imagine for a moment if you were just so thankful that God had saved a wretched sinner like you. Imagine for just a moment if you were just so grateful that God had adopted you into His family and given you the keys to glory. Imagine if you were just so in love with God and just had such a high and holy view of God and the gospel that nothing else in the entire world could steal your peace and joy, because for you, salvation was enough. You see, gratitude is the key. But it's so easy to get sidetracked. It's easy to fall into the cycle of cynicism. Paul mentions a thorn in his flesh at one point in the New Testament. It's a good example of how easy it can be for any of us, including the Apostle Paul, to fall into this trap. In 2 Corinthians 12, 8 and 9, it says this, concerning this, the thorn, Paul says, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it would leave me. But He said to me, God, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weaknesses. Therefore, Paul says, I will gladly, most gladly, boast all the more about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may reside in me. You see, when Paul's perspective was focused on the grace of God and the reality of God's perfect power in his own personal weakness, he was more than grateful and happy and thankful. But when he was focused on the thorn in his flesh, he fell into that trap that we often fall into ourselves. We lose our grateful heart and our thankfulness. You see, a grateful heart can see triumph even in the face of tribulation. A grateful heart can see triumph even with the thorn in the flesh, because of the power of God's grace and the power of God's love and the power of God's peace and God's joy. It's why I keep telling you over and over again that gratitude is the key, which is why you should work on it and be disciplined about it.